So far this season, it is pretty evident that the New York Rangers have one glaring issue currently, and that is the lack of scoring. This team has, for the most part, game after game, been able to create a decent amount of chances there. It's not like they've been some kind of like bottom five team in creating, high danger, medium danger, and low danger chances, but this team has had a real struggle at actually finishing those chances and scoring the goals there because they can create a lot of good looks there. They get some good chances, but they can't actually finish them and actually score the goals, which of course is very much needed. So in today's video, we're going to discuss that 2-1 loss, the most recent game there, to the Detroit Red Wings, where the Rangers ended up only scoring a single goal against former Ranger Cam Talbot, who was in net. And also, though, we're going to talk a bit about the St. Louis Blues and some of the players on that team that could end up being pretty enticing for the Rangers to possibly trade for at some point before this upcoming trade deadline this season, but also into this upcoming offseason as well. In the summer of 2026, the Rangers could be very active if they let a guy like Artemi Panarin walk, and they could look to replace him via trade and try and get some players to help kind of, this team offensively, of course, if he does leave. And if that's the case, the Blues are a team that seem like they could be shopping some players around, definitely might be looking to make some big trades happen. And they've got a lot of enticing, somewhat kind of young, middle kind of 20s forwards that I think could really fit this team's timeline, but also can help them kind of now in the future and just be, a real good help offensively for this team. So let's get right into it here, and we'll start off by talking about that 2-1 loss to the Detroit Red Wings, which was definitely another one of those games where the Rangers, I think, probably should have had more than one goal. And it's not like to say that they dominated this game or had a crazy amount of high danger chances or outshot them by a crazy amount there, but it's just another game where the Rangers just can't seem to score enough. And it's back-to-back games now of scoring one single goal. They got that 2-1 shootout win a game or two ago. The most recent one is a 2-1 loss to the Wings there that they lose, in regulation after conceding a very late goal there in the third period, which is unfortunate after a pretty incredible performance from Jonathan Quick, who was just amazing in that game there against the Wings, made a bunch of crazy good stops. Rangers got outshot quite a bit there, but, Quick really held this team in it there. So I think it's just unfortunate, game after game, we're seeing the exact same issue. And it's almost kind of funny. Last season you have the biggest problem, and the reason why this team didn't make playoffs, the main one at least, was the poor defensive play and the not amazing goaltending. Well, now this time around, you've got the goaltending that has been pretty good for the most part, especially Jonathan Quick, who has been pretty amazing in each and every single one of his starts so far. And then you've got, the defense that has been quite incredible for the most part. A couple games here and there haven't been too perfect, but I think other than that, they have been really, really good. And then, you've got on the other hand there, the offense this season, of course, has just kind of fallen flat on their face, and they've been, like a bottom three offense in the entire NHL. So it's just really tough to see, of course. And I don't know exactly what needs to change because I think this team has more talent offensively than kind of what they've been doing, of course. I mean, I'm not going to say they have some kind of top 3 or top 5 offense in the entire league and, should be one of the best offenses in the entire league, but they should definitely be out of the bottom 3 or 5 conversation. This team is not a kind of bottom offense in the entire league. They have a lot better players than that. So that's where it is definitely kind of frustrating as a Rangers fan because you see this team went out there, they made a bunch of changes on the back end there. They added in some players on the forward side of things. They, brought back Quickie, of course, gave him that extension last season, and then you bring in a new coaching staff, which I think has done a really good job so far. And, even offensively, I think the coaches have done a pretty good job, but it's just the players that I feel like aren't able to kind of capitalize on a lot of these big chances they're getting, which is a cause and a reason, of course, on why this team, does have the record that they have. And it's on a terrible record, not in an absolutely kind of terrible spot right now, but it could be a whole lot better if this offense was just playing around kind of league average, which is the big problem because you've got some amazing goaltending, you've got some amazing defensemen, you've got a good coaching staff there, but offensively, this team, game after game, just cannot get the job done. Moving on now, let's take a look at the St. Louis Blues, as David Pagnotta did come out and say that the St. Louis Blues seem like a team that are kind of open to making some trades possibly and are willing to listen, on certain players. So I think the Blues are definitely a team that the Rangers could be pretty kind of eager to go after via trade. I think they have a lot of players that, right now are in their kind of mid-20s that are on a not great Blues team, of course, that may want to end up possibly leaving. And some of them do have some no trade clauses like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, but those are definitely some players that I think could maybe want to come to New York and also could be some pretty great fits on this team. Now, they don't have any real kind of, big superstar names or anything like that, but they do have some really good, maybe all-star caliber players that, can be these point per game kind of players and, could just be real good contributors potentially for this team in a top 6 role, which I think the Rangers could probably use another top 6 guy in there. Ideally, I think you're adding in a winger, but a center could work because, lots of center, of course, can play wing, but we also have guys like JT Miller and Mika Zibanejad who can play center and wing if they have to. So I think that flexibility is nice and the versatility, but I just think this Rangers team desperately, if they want to, be a real serious threat come playoff time, have to add in at least one more offensive piece. And I don't think one more piece is going to, set this offense up to be just incredible for a playoff run. But I think we're definitely one piece away from really seeing this offense maybe kind of really be quite deadly because they've got so much talent there. And I think the depth isn't bad either, but like I said, it's just game after game. They create a lot of chances, but just can't seem to finish on them. So maybe another piece comes in there and you can kind of get a little more going possibly. And I don't know, maybe it's just a chemistry thing right now. Who knows exactly what it is and what's really causing all these problems because I think, like I said, this team is very talented, but adding in a guy like, a Jordan Kyrou, a Robert Thomas, a point-per-game caliber guy, or maybe you can somehow swindle a guy like Dylan Holloway, who is a maybe potential star caliber guy. I mean, they do have a lot of really good young talent on that team. Maybe some people would be enticed by going after a guy like Pavel Buchnevich. Not really the guy I would kind of look for most on that team, but I do think the St. Louis Blues have a few players that could be really good targets for this Rangers team to trade for, so let's take a look at those names now. And first off, with a defenseman, I think there's only one target that really makes some sense, and that is Philip Broberg. Unfortunately, Colton Parayko, their number one defenseman, who would be, I think, a great add for this team, he's a righty, so currently having Foxy, Borgen, and Schneider, to me, another righty probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, of course, unless they were, shipping one of them off in the deal, like a Borgen or Schneider, I guess maybe, or you're seeing a guy like Borgen or Schneider move to the left side, which it definitely does not seem like, of course, Mike Sullivan wants to even try that necessarily, so I don't think that'll happen there. I don't think they're going to trade for a guy like Parayko, but Philip Broberg, who is a, guy in his mid-20s right now, of course, came over from the Oilers. He, of course, is a player that could help this team for not only right now, immediately, but also, going forward into the future. He can kind of run with the core players like Foxy and Borgen and Schneider and Lafreniere and Cooley and those kind of guys of that age, for quite some time. So that's a nice thing as well. And he's just a solid kind of two-way defenseman, not too flashy, not going to be some great offensive or great defensive guy, but can just be, decent in both kind of areas potentially, and, could be a solid option for that second pair. And if you can sign him to a medium to the longer term kind of deal there possibly, maybe you can kind of get a bit of a steal here because he is, a former kind of top draft pick there, of course. Hasn't quite panned out to be the player that people kind of thought he could potentially end up becoming, but maybe he has a little more room to kind of develop there. Maybe can hit somewhat closer to that ceiling that he once had, of course, but all in all, right now, he's just a kind of decent, solid second pairing caliber guy and definitely could be a decent target potentially for this Rangers team because he can help them now and longer term. For the forwards, though, they have quite a few options that I think could be really good targets. Now, on this side of things, this might be a thing where you have to kind of wait until the offseason unless you are trading away a guy like Panarin midseason to make the cap work. It might be a little tricky otherwise, but I think a guy like Jordan Kyrou or Robert Thomas, of course, would be great options. They both have cap hits around like $8 million for another 4 or 5 years, whatever it is. So they've got, decent contracts, but I think the value of what they can bring on those deals is not too bad, especially with the cap going up. It's not like these are absolute kind of slam dunk team-friendly deals as of this moment, but in a year or two, if they can get back on track to their kind of peak selves, they can be point-per-game kind of plus players, and with about an $8 million cap hit right now, that's not too bad with the way the cap's going. So I think those are two players that could be pretty good contributors and could be great kind of targets for this team. Robert Thomas can play center and wing, where a guy like Kyrou is more of a winger, but Even with the Rangers already having guys like, Noah Laba on that third line as that centerman there, and then you've got your kind of locked in fourth line center of Sam Carrick, and you have guys like Trocheck, JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, who can all be kind of top six centermen. But to me, I think, going out there and adding in a guy like Robert Thomas, for example, who can play, center and wing, and you have guys like Zibanejad and JT Miller who can play center and wing. So I don't think it has to be a winger. I think it can be a guy who could play either one, center or wing. I think that is an option because, most centermen, of course, can kind of move to wing somewhat seamlessly. I mean, it's not the easiest thing for all of them, but a lot of them can play either one. And when you have guys like Miller and Mika who clearly can play both, and you add in a guy like a Robert Thomas, for example, well, that would just add in so much more depth and overall talent to the center spot, which, of course, is one that is so important come playoff time. You got to be loaded down the middle, so you're having a bunch of centermen like, Zibanejad, JT Miller, Trocheck, Laba. You've got, maybe Robert Thomas, for example, hypothetically, or a new guy being added in, and Sam Carrick has that 4C. I mean, you're creating a lot of good depth there. And then you have guys like Brodzinski and Parson who could also play center if needed. So I think, it doesn't have to be a winger, although maybe it's a little more ideal that it does happen like that, and maybe it's a little bit better of a fit if you want to have a guy like JT Miller for the foreseeable future, back at center. But we've seen, Mike Sullivan kind of, mixing things around a little bit there and have Mika at center and at wing, and same thing with JT. So I think those are obviously options. And if the right deal does come across the table for a centerman, I think it's obviously an option to go after, even though you do have, up-and-coming guy like Laba, and you've got a lot of talent right now. But if you are able to go out there and add in another kind of top six forward, even if it is a center, then you're just adding in a lot more kind of depth and talent, and you're sliding guys who were in the top six there, down to the third line now. Maybe where you have a guy like a, Mika Zibanejad or a Lafreniere or the new guy coming in who's a top six caliber guy, and you're just having them on that third line, which creates a whole lot more kind of talent on the forward side of things and makes this offense potentially a whole lot more deadly, which I think it's obvious. Like I talked about, this team definitely needs another piece in there, a top six guy offensively to really kind of help maybe, get things going here. But I just think this team's got a lot of talent. They're great defensively for the most part. They've got good goaltending. I think they're pretty well coached. It's just the offense right now that is a pretty massive question mark with this New York Rangers team. And of course, if the Blues were willing to retain some salary on guys like maybe even a Braden Shen, who's a solid forward option, or guys like Kyrou or Thomas, I think it could make a deal even more kind of likely. And also they have some young guys like Jake Neighbors, Dylan Holloway, who I doubt they're really trying to move, but maybe you could go after one of those guys who is really talented. You throw away some prospects and picks, and you get some kind of young guys who can help you right now, and for the long term, that also could be a pretty decent option. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video about the New York Rangers every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on the New York Rangers 2-1 loss to the Detroit Red Wings Sunday night. And also, what are your thoughts on the New York Rangers making a trade with the St. Louis Blues? What are your thoughts on trading for guys like Robert Thomas, Kyrou, Shen? Do you want to go after those kind of guys? Would you rather go after someone else? Would you want to go after a defenseman like Broberg? Let me know your thoughts on possibly trading with the St. Louis Blues. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.